So a little bit of sort of information architecture 101 for SharePoint. These blocks represent the kinds of things that I think of, or Emily and I, or basically Simpraxians think about when we're thinking about information architecture in SharePoint. All right, well, for those of you who are here, welcome to Ask Simpraxis for the 3rd of May, 2023. We are going to be talking today about building a sustainable information architecture, and we're specifically going to talk it through with an eye toward benefits in a human resources department. May not match exactly what you do in your particular company or organization, but it ought to give you some rules of thumb that probably apply, even if it's not exactly the same as yours. This is the team. We know that Julie is at the Microsoft 365 conference in Las Vegas. We don't know where Todd and Derek are, but they probably have some very good excuse, and they're working on something very important right now. But they will join us momentarily, I'm sure. So we're going to talk through a few things about this sort of concept of benefits documents. We're really focusing a lot on information architecture here, but we want to talk first of all, why do we care? What's the business use case for doing this well? Hi, Derek. We're going to talk a little bit about the maturity model and how it applies to this particular scenario, because we love talking about the maturity model. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of information architecture in SharePoint. So if you've been using SharePoint for a while, this might be old hat to you, but it's a little bit of my thinking about how I've approached IA over the last 10 years. Emily will talk a little bit about how all this applies to benefits, and then we'll talk about how we use that information architecture to get content into pages. If you hear my dog barking, I apologize. Emily.
So one of the reasons we picked benefits for this use case is there's a couple special things about them. It's not just the decentralization of documents across different site collections. Benefit selection is pretty challenging for end users. There's a high level of subject matter expertise to understand the differences and nuances between them, which is why very often you have people in your organization really just focusing on defining and making those benefits available. So it's content that is very unfamiliar to our end users, and it's constantly changing. So benefits can change every year depending on what your organization wants to do, and therefore the documents are constantly changing too. This is challenging for the people who are maintaining it, but also the people who are consuming it as things are shifting around. As I mentioned, the management of benefits may cross different departments. HR might own some benefits, finance might own some benefits. We've seen at some organizations, there may be a travel group and travel may own some benefits. So the content may not be centralized. And then for benefits, we have this special little overlap of content as well, where we might have some new hires coming in towards the end of the year while we're opening up open enrollment for the next year. So we need this year's benefits showing as well as next year's benefits. So we have that short period of time where we're adding double the content in different areas, and we want to make sure people understand what's current and what's for the future.
And if you're like me, you say, wait a minute, didn't we last year have? And I want to go look at last year's to compare it.
Great point.
All right, so if we think about the maturity model, and we see, when we start working with clients, we see people who are all over the spectrum. And it's one of the reasons we like the maturity models. It sort of gives us a gauge of where people are and how we need to approach things. So, at the lowest level, there probably are some benefits documents sitting in a document library somewhere, maybe in a folder that's labeled benefits, maybe not, but they're out there somewhere. So maybe if you search, you might find something. A little bit more maturity around the 200 level, that there's an HR site, they have a document library, there are probably some benefits information in there. You think, you may end up having to talk to the HR folks because nobody's really sure if everything is there or not. Around 300, you have a decently structured HR site. It's got the benefits laid out in some sort of organized way. There's some metadata that we can use to sort of slice and dice. There's some pages that the content is embedded in so that there's some context around the content if it is document-based. Level 400, we're starting to see more feedback loops. It's not just that I can find the information, but I can ask questions and the information gets improved, and then there's sort of a virtuous cycle there. And then, maybe at level 500, you have something fancy like a Benabot that helps you navigate your benefits, your forms, your all sorts of things. Maybe walk you through that open enrollment process. Maybe, sort of act as the stand-in HR representative for the folks in your organization. There you go. You have a picture of our Benabot.
So here's an image of an example of a lower maturity level for benefits. So here, another sneak peek at what we do at Simpraxis. We have an employee site, and there on the right, you see we have quick links to our benefits. We're a 5-person organization. It's super tiny. We don't need a lot of complexity. So of course, what we're going through today, you want to match what makes sense for your organization. And so far, Simpraxis doesn't have complex needs for these different content types and search-based approaches, so we haven't implemented them.
So a little bit of sort of information architecture 101 for SharePoint. These blocks represent the kinds of things that I think of, or Emily and I, or basically Simpraxians think about when we're thinking about information architecture in SharePoint. And some of this sort of bleeds over into some of the other apps and services within Microsoft 365 as well, but it's fairly SharePoint specific. We in this instance are going to focus more on things like content types, site columns, some managed metadata. We'll sort of touch a little bit on what lists and libraries you might use, how you're going to organize your content and stuff. But not every sort of view of information architecture encompasses all of this, but these are all things that you should be thinking about when you're starting to put together your information architecture. One of the things that people always say is, well, I hate metadata. I don't want to put in metadata. Metadata is stupid. And then you see file names like this. And we've all seen them. They all are loaded with metadata. You've got the modified date, you've got the project name, you've got the file name itself, you've got who modified it, how many times they've modified it, at least in theory, except that then you've got some other random whatever in there that means something to somebody but isn't really all that clear. And then you have a status, but maybe the status isn't really right, so there's more status. So all of that is metadata. And when people have resistance to metadata, I love to haul out this slide because they use it all the time. And so helping them understand that splitting this information out separate from the file name is going to really help things. You see this in HR sites all the time too. Medical benefits revised September 15th, and then there's another one revised September 30th. Well, why is the old one still there? Why are you putting that out there like that? So we have discussions about file names. Oh, project phase is embedded in there too. All kinds of interesting information. So let's talk a little bit about content types. What is a content type? It's a type of content. No, it's not. It is and it isn't. I usually describe it as a business object, something that you talk about in your organization that has some sort of weight. It doesn't have to be document-based. It doesn't have to be, sort of an organized thing, but there are just objects in every organization that matter. And how do they apply to things like benefits? Well, you might have a benefits description. What is the description of the free company car plan? You might have a benefits overview that is from a vendor. So the vendor gives you a bunch of materials that you want to give to people, and that distinction may not be a great one, benefits description and benefits overview, but I was typing. You might have enrollment instructions. How do I sign up for this particular benefit? And then that way we can treat those like type of objects similarly whether it's just to sort of slice and dice the content and show it in more intelligent ways, or to apply different processes like different retention policies, different approval processes based on what content type they are. There are some other blocks here that are just sort of other kinds of content types that you're likely to have in an organization. Each one of these content types inherits from an existing content type. So all of those colored blocks could just inherit from document, though we'll show you a couple of tricks that we use to create either a hierarchy of content types or some interstitial content types that help us sort of group and collate things a little bit better by building an infrastructure under the covers. So basically everything in SharePoint is actually uses the content type, and a lot of people don't even know that, and they don't care, and they don't need to care on some level. They don't need to know that it's a content type, but they do need to know that there are these objects that have some sort of consistent organizing principle. Item is sort of the base content type that almost everything inherits from, and that's where that pesky title column comes from. Sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't, but it's always hauled along from item. Document it actually inherits from item, and it adds an additional piece of metadata in a sense, and the metadata is the file name. It's actually the file that represents the document itself. And then as you start to build your own content types, you're going to inherit from things like the base document, and maybe you have a benefits description content type that includes things like the fiscal year, a brief overview so that people can just read a blurb about what this thing is as opposed to opening the document. Who's the contact person for this particular benefit? How do what's the link to go and enroll for that thing? Whatever that blue section is going to be, whatever metadata is going to provide some value to a process or to somebody who's trying to understand that particular object. So an effective information architecture lets you answer questions like we have on this slide. So if people come to you and ask you things like what benefits are available this year, well, that's sort of a hint for a user story that you want to fulfill, right? You want to be able to let them answer that question for themselves by having a view of the content that is going to help them see that set of content. How many claims have we had from accounting this year? Well, if you have a claim form and you just have you have a document library with just documents in it, there's no metadata to work with. So you can't answer a question like this. So these kinds of questions are what lead us to good user stories, which also leads us to good information architecture to help answer those things. I mentioned hierarchical content types earlier. So we'll often use this hierarchical capability to our advantage. In almost every instance, unless we're doing something really, really simple, we create what we think of as an organizational base document. It inherits from document and has no extra metadata, or sometimes it has one or two pieces of metadata. But those site columns. Those site columns should apply to every content type inside the entire organization. So it's pretty rare that we actually add site columns there. But by using that interstitial content type, and interstitial means in between two things. The reason we do that is that we just want to be able to roll things up that inherit from that node in the hierarchy. We never actually enable that content type for use anywhere. It's just sort of a placeholder for us. And then we might have something like benefits document inherit from that base document content type. And then the different types of benefits documents, a plan summary, a claim form, a benefits description, whatever, would inherit from that benefits document content type. And if you think about it, that gives us a lot of different places to sort of hook into for rolling content up or reorganizing it. Show us all the content that inherits from benefits document, or show us all the content that inherits from our organizational base document. when you think about information architecture approaches, and Homer is always concentrating on these things a lot, you can start with, with benefits. It often feels very local. You have one HR department. The information architecture is only going to be used by that HR department for their benefits stuff. And so the tendency is to just build things locally, which is not a bad thing. But what you don't want to do is add columns to lists and libraries directly, unless you're absolutely positive those columns have no reuse at all. Meaning nobody is ever going to need, a contact person column in any other place in that particular site. If you do need some reuse for a site column, or for a column of information, you would use a site column, and then it's reusable. If more than one list or library is going to use it, that's the reason to build a site column. There's not really any penalty for using a site column over a list column, and it saves you a lot of rework later if you realize you need some reuse instead. So site columns and site content types are a great way to go with something like benefits, if you're sure that you will only have one HR site and those concepts are only going to be used by HR. Something like contact person is actually a very generic concept, so you might want to build that site column in the content type hub, which is at the enterprise level, top level of the tenant. And that means that that particular site column or that particular content type that you build there is available to more than one site. A benefits document likely only to be in the HR site. We've had some clients who have an HR department and a benefits department. Interesting. So that means that there are two, and a benefits document sometimes gets managed by either one. Therefore, that needs to be up at the enterprise level. So when in doubt, and when you're not sure what level is the right one, go up a level. Because if you don't, you're gonna have to say no, because reconfiguring things is really hard. It's a lot harder than doing it right the first time.
Mark, another use case here is, especially if you have say you have a branch in Canada, and you have specific documents specific for a region. That's the kind of instance where you want to make sure you're using the content types across multiple sites.
Right. Yep. And reorgs down the line, maybe you only have an HR department for the US today, but you're going to become an international company. That's a great reason to sort of plan ahead a little bit. So what does all that look like for benefits?
All right, so diving in and kind of continuing on the use case that Derek mentioned of, in this hypothetical organization, we have multiple regions. So what you can see on the screen right now is we have a site for benefits, and depending on how you want to structure that, it could also be a hub site. As we build out the different document libraries, you'll see we have the default document library with document content type. Typically, when we tend to make that custom information architecture, we'll also use this opportunity to make new named libraries and then use documents as that catch-all for the few things that can't really fit into our defined information architecture. So you'll see we have a benefits library, and some common different content types that we've seen across benefits in organizations are things like a plan summary, which is that overview of the benefits, a claim form, maybe a job aid helping support someone how they can elect these benefits in the different systems. And then often there's also legal notices which organizations are required to share. Now, you'll see one other thing, we've talked a lot about content types for documents so far, but you can also make a content type in pages. So you can see here we have a site page for benefits overview. And this will matter a little bit later when we talk about this idea of a detailed search, where we want to pull everything about benefits everywhere into one spot. So even our benefits pages, which we're putting all of the information on, is something that we can bring into that search. Now in the screen, you'll also see, of course, we have another site, collection finance. They don't have any benefits, so they don't have any of this information. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into that benefits library and look at the different content types. So looking at the different content types, based off of the pattern that Mark was referencing earlier. So we had the interstitial content type of the org document, then we had the benefits document, and then we had these content types inheriting from it. And that's also where the question is coming from Mark around that pattern, if that was something we defined or if that was something defined by Microsoft. So what we're seeing on this screen is we did indeed use benefits document as a parent content type. And in that parent content type, we added site columns for benefit type and year. Now, because we inherited from that content type when we made plan summary, claim form, job aid, and legal notice, it's automatically inheriting those site columns for benefit type and year. Now, if you are planning to do a search-based centralization of your content, I also recommend creating a calculated column called sortable title, because title is not a sortable field. So if you want your benefits to appear alphabetically in some context, that makes sense. Be thoughtful about alphabetical versus relevance, though, in your results. So just be really careful when you're making that choice, too. And then right below our orange library, you can see what it actually looks like in a document library. So we're showing the column for content type, benefit type, year. And then in this one, we also have a column for region, which is defaulting to United States, because we know this organization is going to be opening other offices, other locations. Now, what about our site columns? I want to call out Mark referenced using term sets, and this is a situation where term sets can be really useful. So at the tenant level, I highly recommend putting year. Very common to need a year column across all kinds of lists and libraries that you're using. Every individual person shouldn't have to maintain the year. You can even go 5 years in advance and have them there waiting for people, and then have it as a recurring task for your group. The other one you see on the left that we have, and you can decide if this is a site level term set or a tenant level term set, depending on whether you're using the content type hub and you're going to have those multiple site collections. But what we can get with the term store is tiering and reuse. So you can see here, we can show relationships. So for example, I can tag a document for dental, and there's 2 types of plans. There's basic and comprehensive. So when someone's searching for it, they may not know to search for a comprehensive plan. They might just be searching for the generic dental. So if I tag dental and comprehensive plan, I can ensure that that content shows up in all of the contexts that they need. Now, another way this term set tiering can be and reuse is helpful is you can see under insurance, we have some disability information for short-term and long-term disability. Well, those are also options for maybe how you're taking time off. So you can see we have the little reuse symbol where you can actually reuse a term in another section or in another term set, but you still have one source of truth. So these are some tips of how to use that term store a little bit more effectively as you are creating your site columns. So let's take a look at what all of this backend IA gives us in the front end for how everybody's going to be consuming that content.
Right. And so that point, this is where you get to start to put things on pages. And so by having all of this metadata and creating managed properties, and if you've seen our previous sessions on expanding search, you can learn about that. We can take that benefits type managed metadata field, turn it into a filter, and then you can search through all of your documents. You can see the filters here in the middle. So we can search by benefit type. We can search by document type, which we renamed in the filter to content type. So you can choose your claim forms, your enrollment form, your notices, your summaries. And then you can get the user to the information that they want very, very quickly. So with one click of a filter, I can get all 4 benefits documents associated with dental. And one of the things, if you look closely on the search results, you can see that both PDFs and those pages are there. So they can get that overview of the content as well as the individual documents. And if you go to the next slide, the next thing that we wanted to do is provide that content contextually on the individual pages themselves. So we've taken the dental page here and we've added a sort of benefits forms and summaries down at the bottom. From there, we provided a search results web part, and this is all using the PNP search results web part, which is one of our 2 favorite web parts that from the community. And so we've used that here to set the query specifically to dental. Now, the advantage here is that during open enrollment, when there are multiple forms of multiple types of dental documents, those are automatically going to show up here. And also, as an administrator, I don't have to go to the dental page every year and remember that I need to touch every single page. As long as I update my documents and put them in one spot and tag them appropriately, they're automatically going to they're automatically going to show up on the pages, and that reduces the friction for the users.
Yeah, it's great when you build pages that are dynamically populated based on what metadata is applied to the content. Because you just change the content or the metadata and magic happens. So it's so exciting when you see somebody's, that light bulb go off for somebody, but it doesn't happen often.
And especially for that weird period where you have open enrollment and the current year's benefits, and both are on the page, instead of having to redesign the entire page, there you have the filters to figure out what information you need. So then, as we've gone through all of these different slides talking about the information architecture, these are just some of the considerations and that information architecture impact. So Mark talked in the beginning a bit about who's managing content. So we're trying to decide our permission structure and site topology there. That could be across departments. It could also be different regions. What different benefit types are available. So we want to think about our IA, what available columns we have. Are the different benefit types, do they have different metadata from each other? So should they have different content type inheritance from each other, different than the example we gave today? And then, of course, we want to think about that life cycle of the benefits document and that management of content, where maybe something starts in a team site as we're figuring it out, and then it finally gets published to that communication site when it is ready to be shared with the organization. We talked a little bit about open enrollment, so figuring out that content type structure and those page search queries. And then last but not least, how do we need to sort and filter these documents? In our examples today, we needed to filter them by year and benefit type on the subsequent pages, and then we just brought all of the benefits together in that detailed search.
There you have it. Here's some resources that we put together based on what we talked about. There's some links to some articles in the community docs, the P&P Modern Search web parts, which are just about the best thing since sliced bread, and some information about content types and stuff as well. All of this is very much our bread and butter. So I know that actually every single one of us has at least a post or two on our blogs about this kind of topic. It's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and learning from failing and learning from succeeding. Our next session will be in 2 weeks. Let's see. We're gonna talk about the Microsoft 365 conference announcements that most of us are watching from afar. Julie will, of course, have some in-person observations. There are a lot of blog posts and things that you can wade through, but we will give you our take on what has happened there. Coming up, we will be speaking at some conferences live. Todd will be at Techorama and you're on mute, dude. In Antwerp, Belgium, in just a couple weeks. I think 4 of us are going to be at the European Collaboration Summit in Düsseldorf the week after that, and then Thrive Conference the week after that in Slovenia. Emily and I will be there. Then in June, we have the 365 EduCon conference in DC, and I think that's, again, 4 of us. We're going to be at that one. Julie and Andrew Connell have the Cloud Dev Clarity podcast that you can listen to at your leisure. And Emily will be speaking online at the ESPC SharePoint week. Actually, that's next week. Emily, what are you going to be talking about?
Next Tuesday, I'm going to be talking about writing for your intranet.
Exciting. Something that everybody should do better, including me. All right. Well, thanks all of you for joining us. Any last minute questions that we have in the chat that I wasn't looking for? We cover everything that people were asking.
We did. We have a final slide too. It has a build if you want to skip through
sorry.
it, Mark, of some of our information architecture better practices that we didn't necessarily call out through our time. But things like naming your document library and cite columns without spaces so you don't get that %20.
Oh, sorry. I'm just.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
It acted weird.
So for anyone that wants to grab a screenshot of those, they can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely some things that help us not get bitten or step in it as we're building things. There are times when we'll turn to each other and say, "Oh, you put a space in the name in my PowerShell or my code." So nobody's perfect, but these are definitely better practices to follow. All right. Well, thanks again for being here. It's 1 o'clock. We will wind it up here and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask in Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.